Welcome back, Western Journal readers, watchers, and listeners. I'm Andrew J. Shasha, supervising editor of features here at the Western Journal, and today we've got a special guest for you, former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, who is now the president of Young America's Foundation. Governor Walker, thank you so much for being with us today. So, Governor, getting off the ground running very quickly here at Young America's Foundation with the Long Game project you've just announced. Sounds a bit like a kind of community organizing outreach campaign, a massive campaign at that. Lots and lots of video all over Twitter and all over the news landscape about it. Can you guys just talk to us a little bit about what it is and where it came from?
Yeah, the Long Game's a response to what we see in society today. You know, America really is under siege. We see it on our campuses, we see it in our culture. Increasingly, we even see it in our communications with the censorship from big tech. And this is something that didn't happen overnight. The left has been at it literally for decades, all the way back to the 1960s with Saul Alinsky. We've seen it over time. And we've got to recognize to counter that, it's not going to take just a news cycle or even a presidential cycle. It's going to take the long game. And this is our long-term plan, not just to be engaged in the battles of the day, but really to win the war when it comes to the heart and soul of our republic. And so it's a 12-point action plan. If people want it, we'll send you a copy absolutely free. Go to yaf.org/longgame, and we'll give you a copy that tells you exactly not only what we're doing, but how people can get engaged by helping us connect with students and helping us support our cause.
Excellent. Could you briefly take us through those 12 prongs of this action plan?
Yeah, the idea is, you know, Young America's Foundation has a proud tradition going all the way back to the 60s with William F. Buckley of training really the next generation of freedom fighters. And what we're doing, we do well. But as I come in now here just a few weeks in, I realized what we're doing is not enough. Not because we're not well-intentioned, but because the left is so overwhelming us. Again, not only in campuses, but in culture and even in our larger communications. And so this long game plan is about dramatically stepping it up and partnering with others to do the same. Right off the bat, we want to have 1 million students participate in our programs. We think of someone like Katie Pavlich, who's a well-known author and Fox News commentator. Well, Katie, about 12, 13 years ago, came to the Reagan Ranch for one of our programs, and it completely changed her life. We need more people like Katie Pavlich in the world, and those are yet to be known. We look at our place on campus, and right now, we're one of the largest organizations out there. We have a presence supporting students on more than 2,000 campuses. That's great. But I realized, hey, there's 4,000 plus campuses in this nation. We need to be all of them. And we not only need to be involved with undergraduates, we need to be involved with our people involved in 2-year associate degree programs in our community and technical colleges. We need to be involved not only in high school, but another one of our points is to go even into junior high and help provide I think about reaching out to preteens in particular. I was 12 years old in 1980 when Ronald Reagan first ran for president. I can't tell you how impactful his being in office was on me, not only as a conservative, but as an optimist. We need to have that same type of impact on preteens. It's not enough just for college. It's not enough just in high school. And oh, by the way, not only when it comes to teenagers and middle school students, but we even need to reach out and help parents of elementary school students. We've seen time and time again examples with the 1619 Project and with many of these Marxist programs where they're trying to get even in the earliest stages of a K through 12 experience. And so another one of our points is to give parents the tools and materials they need to counteract that, to support our founding principles, to lift up our founders, not as demons, but rather as victors, as someone who helped create this remarkable country, and to get a return to our Judeo-Christian values. All those things are part of our long game plan, plus many others. Free speech, we're involved in free speech cases. We need to be not just waiting for them to come to us, we need to be aggressive in seeking them out and working with the partners like Alliance Defending Freedom. All these things are part of this 12-point action plan, really to counteract the many, many years of the left seeping into culture and on campus, and certainly now this last year or two into our communications with big tech. We can do it. I'm optimistic. The odds have been stacked against us, and we're still doing reasonably well to counteract things. We just need to level the playing field, get in earlier, and get to more students. And we know our message works, which is why the left's trying so hard to cancel us.
Absolutely. It sounds like a great fighting plan. probably a winning plan. But you got at a couple great things there, particularly just about the fact that, for better or for worse, and certainly, despite best efforts, the left has definitely outpositioned conservatives on the college campus and in the culture. How did they get that foothold, and how did conservatives kind of cede that ground? And was it challenging or humbling or difficult to kind of come to the recognition that despite, what good work has been done, maybe we haven't been doing enough?
Well, it's a natural conclusion, having come out of fighting some pretty big fights in Wisconsin where the odds were stacked against me, both in getting our reforms done and then becoming the only governor in American history to ever survive a recall election. I know how to fight. I know how to push back and not just fight, but win. And I see that same sort of battle helping our students in our college campuses. The fact of the matter is just part of our philosophy. As conservatives, we put our faith in the individual and the family. The left puts their belief in the government and the bureaucracy. And so it makes sense that their long-term plan would be to take over government, take over bureaucracy. And really, much of our university and college system is just an extension of that. And so they felt they could get themselves into these elements. They're always thinking about power. We see it even in the House and Senate today with the very first bill that they're bringing up for a vote in terms of introducing legislation is something about taking power away from the states and putting it in the hands of the people in Washington, which is the absolute inverse of what our founders intended. But you look at that, that's just their nature. And so our nature is, we compete in the battle of ideas, and then we go back and spend time with our families, our children, our communities. And we just got to wake up to the fact that if we want to continue to have those freedoms, if we want to continue to be able to hand on a great country filled with freedom and opportunity for everyone onto future generations, we got to stand up and fight for it. We can't just assume that the left's going to play by the old rules. We've got to step up and respond, and that's exactly what the long game's all about.
You got at the kind of campus structure and the educational kind of indoctrination that we're seeing from the left nationwide right now. I mean, something else that you had mentioned right there that really stood out to me was the power dynamic. The left frequently talks about the power dynamic, uses it to kind of get at different groups in society and essentially say that they've been kept down by the power dynamic. And if you would just give the left more power, they would lift up those voices in those communities. Of course, we see that when they get that power, they don't necessarily do that. You mentioned the ADF, and of course, they just won a case pretty recently for a student named Chike Uzugbunam, who I believe at Georgia Gwinnett College had been preaching the gospel on campus and had gotten punished and thrown off campus for it. This is, a black student preaching the gospel. I mean, how do we expose the left's hypocrisy on that front, that they talk about giving voice to different ideas and different groups, but it's really only about their ideas, their power struggle, and what they want at the end of the day?
No, it totally is. They're just filled with inherent contradictions. I remember the back of a car years ago in the midst of the protests, the Occupy movement starting on my street in Madison instead of Wall Street, where they were occupying our state capitol. And the back of this car had two bumper stickers. One said coexist. I'm sure many people have seen that before. Right next to it was a recall Scott Walker bumper sticker. It's kind of like these calls for unity. At the same time, anyone who disagrees with them is either canceled or called a racist or a sexist or transphobic or Neanderthal or whatever it might be. We need to wake up and fight back. This is one of those where, again, the reason why, I firmly believe, the reason why they're trying to intimidate us and cancel us and marginalize us, and years ago tried to recall me, was because they know that if we have a level playing field, they know if we can articulate ideas, people will be drawn to them. And even more so when we can show with the facts that our ideas work, that common sense conservative reforms work. And so they want to do everything in their power to diminish or eliminate the ability for particularly college students, but for anyone in society increasingly, to actually hear these ideas. And this is why we need to push back on this. I think there's a great optimistic story to be told. I think, and again, this week's a good example. The left is constantly looking to pit one group of people against another group of people in this country. If you don't believe this, if you're either concerned about what happened to George Floyd, or you're not, and you only like the police. Well, the fact of the matter is you can be concerned about that and still want to defend the police and think overall they're doing a good job. They don't believe that. They want to argue If you don't agree with them, they're going to brand you with something. We need to get past that, give our students the ability to be brave and stand up for their ideas, to show that by bringing them together that they're not alone, that there are other voices like that out there. And then I think particularly for many of the students on campus who are truly undecided, who are just trying to figure out what is exactly going on, make the case to them that conservatives, those of us on the right, are the ones who want to bring people together. We love America. We want everyone to do well in this country. We love our own families, and we want everybody else in this country and their families to do well. Our message is simple. It's more freedom and more opportunity. Get the government out of the way. Put your belief in the people and the families of this great country. And their argument is to divide people and put their faith and really the power in the hands of the elite and the government. And I think the more people hear that, the more they realize we don't have a different message for every different interest group out there. Our message is simple. It doesn't matter whether you're young or old, rich or poor, black or white, gay or straight. It doesn't matter who you are. Our message is simple. We want you to live the best dream possible. We want you to live your piece of the American dream. And we, by and large, want to get the government out of the way so that you, your family, your friends, your circle of neighbors can do exactly that, no matter what you look like or where you come from. They're the ones that want to create one group of people against the other, and it's just not going to work. That's what happens in Marxist countries. That's why it historically has failed, because sooner or later, in socialist countries in particular, as Thatcher said, you run out of other people's money to spend. In this case, we want everybody to do well, and the more we can get that message out, the better we're going to be.
And that message, that unity message, a community message for, the best for the individual, for the community, for the country, kind of one people striving towards the best for everyone. That sounds like a pretty uncontroversial message, right? Unfortunately, we do see, like you said earlier, that people who decide and are bold enough to stick to that message, especially on our college campuses and especially on our high school campuses across the country, they get vilified and crucified for it. And you've spoken about optimism, and of course we like to stay optimistic on the right, but how do you encourage, students and younger folks to be optimistic in the face of being dragged through the mud, a la Brett Kavanaugh, for their beliefs and for their values just being destroyed in the public sphere over it? How do you stay optimistic and stay bold in that?
Well, we got to give those students more cover. One of the challenges right now is if you're someone like that, you stand out because you're largely alone on our campuses. That's why I want to get to every campus, and I want to add 1 million more people, and I want to get, we've seen tremendous growth during the shutdown of campuses last year on our YouTube channel. I want to get to 5 million subscribers and 1 billion views, because I know in addition to bringing record numbers of speakers to our campuses, which is a part of our long game plan, I also know I've got to find other ways to reach students who aren't at that site, aren't at that campus, aren't at that place at that time, but we can get a message to them. The more we can surround students who share our beliefs or even interest in our beliefs with the idea that they're not alone, that there are others who think like them, that they have the kind of air and ground support to let them know that there are people who've got their back, and YAF, definitely. I want the message to be Young America's Foundation has your back. We're going to support and train and really intellectually arm men and women all across America to carry this message of freedom and opportunity forward, to counter the nonsense. You think of BLM, which has 3 of its leaders and founders are self-admitted Marxist sympathizers and organizers. When you look at critical race theory, this is not about race or reconciliation. It's fundamentally about imposing Marxist indoctrination into our schools and our colleges and universities under the mindset that decades ago they couldn't do it based on class, because economically we have a largely classless society in America where anyone can succeed regardless of where they come from. And now they're trying to pit people one against each other based on race and sex and gender. We've got to stand up and say that does not fly in America. E pluribus unum, out of many come one. And we share those values as Americans, even though we each have individual, unique characteristics. We need to embrace the individual, we need to embrace the family, and know the one thing that brings us together, united as a nation, is that those freedoms and opportunities are available for all of us. One of our great leaders, Dr. Martin Luther King, wisely said in his I Have a Dream speech that he dreamed of a day when his children could be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. And yet some of those same people who try to claim his legacy falsely are trying to pit groups of people against each other based on things like race and income and other things that really divide us as a nation, not unite us. We need to show our students that they can stand up for the truth and that we'll have their back.
And it sounds kind of like what you're getting at there. It sounds quite a bit like, kind of the cultural Marxism that we hear discussed. A personal hero of mine, Andrew Breitbart, talked about that. A wealth of ways, a wealth of times. And so that kind of pairs with this cancel culture, and it creates a very, unforgiving political environment where, again, you're crucified for your beliefs, and there's no atonement. There's no true atonement. If you speak up and then you get reamed, even if you apologize, you're not forgiven. Unfortunately, I think that there's been kind of some tendency after years and years of being pushed to the breaking point. Some on the right have started to adopt those tactics as well. I mean, can you just speak to that a little bit and just kind of discuss, on the right, whether you're of faith or not? I think there's a pretty broad belief that, the Judeo-Christian ethic and the idea of forgiveness has built Western culture and Western society and certainly benefited the United States. Can a culture survive without that forgiving kind of nuanced approach to things?
Well, not only in that regard, but I think overall, you look at this last year with the riots we saw across America. I think that's a part of a breakdown in society that's largely connected to the disconnect that many, not all, but many, particularly young people have, students and even into millennials age groups, have walked away from the church. They've walked away from those Judeo-Christian values, not only for forgiveness, but the sense of having moral truths. And so if you don't have a core, if you don't have God and country, if you don't have a core belief in God, and you don't have a belief that your country, despite imperfect people, and I've said this for quite some time, when we think of our founders and people sometimes attack them, there hasn't been a perfect person on this planet since over 2,000 years ago, and that's only one. Every one of the rest of us has some degree of sin throughout the decade, throughout the lifespan of this great planet that we live on. But this country was founded on such a remarkable idea, and it was set up with the vision of founders, not just to stay the same, but to grow and to prosper. And so we've seen things like the 13th and the 14th and the 15th and the 19th Amendment that have added to the freedoms that all of our people have. And we need to continue to improve as a country. But you don't do that by somehow buying into this lie that America is awful. There's a reason why more than 1 million people legally immigrate to the United States of America every single year. There's a reason why no other country in the world comes even close to the number of foreign-born citizens we have in this country. In fact, I think the next closest country is 4 times less than we have in the United States. There's a reason why I can remember even as a kid, and just as much today, but as a kid, those images of people coming on barely inflatable rafts over shark-infested waters from Cuba to South Florida to get to the United States. Why would they do that? Why would they risk those things? Why would people come from the old Soviet Union, the old Soviet bloc countries? Why are people fleeing Hong Kong and China? Why are people coming from Venezuela and Cuba yet even today? Because of the freedom and the opportunity that's uniquely available in these United States. The people who are teaching our children to hate America are not only wrong, they're doing a disservice not only to our children, but to all the other people around the world who dream of coming here to this country because of the uniqueness of the freedom and opportunity, the shining city on the hill that Reagan once talked about. And so that's where we've got to combine things. You can be a happy warrior and still be a fighter. And sometimes I think people think to be a fighter, you've got to be mad and angry and down all the time. No, we take this fight absolutely seriously. But we fight because we love this country. And as Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It doesn't just get passed on to you through the bloodstream. You got to stand up and fight for it and defend it and pass it on to the next generation to do exactly the same thing. And that's what the long game is all about, making sure those in the next generation have the tools to stand up and fight and defend and then pass on freedom to the generation that comes after them.
So with a massive campaign at YAF, the long game, with all these values getting pushed out, all of this talk getting pushed out, I'm sure audiences would love to hear a little bit more about you. So for folks who are a little bit younger, folks who maybe didn't follow the last couple campaign cycles, or folks who didn't grow up in the Midwest, I mean, can you just talk a little bit about your background, who you are, and maybe a little bit of your journey to conservatism for us?
Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously, I was elected governor in 2010, and which was an incredibly tight race at the time. Little did I know, about a couple of months after that election, I faced about 100,000 protesters occupying our state capitol. But in many ways, I was prepared for that because before I was governor, I was the first and maybe only Republican ever elected as the Milwaukee County executive. Milwaukee County is the largest county in the state of Wisconsin. It's about two-thirds Democrat versus Republican. But there was a big scandal back in 2002. I decided to step up and do something about it, and I, much to the surprise of most of the pundits, won that special election that year, and then came back and got reelected twice after that before running for governor. And we were able to dramatically turn things around, hold the line on property taxes each of the 8 years I was in office, cut the debt, reduce the size of the workforce, really make the government work much more efficiently. In fact, even during that time, the county ran the park system in Milwaukee County, and we got a gold medal for having the best park system in the nation. So we were able to do things efficiently and effectively and still produce good results like a gold medal winning park system. Before that, I served in the state legislature. I always, as a kid, I thought I would go into business, but I always was a bit of a geek when it came to history. When I was real little, I loved, even in '76 with my dad, watching Ronald Reagan back then at the National Convention give a speech that I think most delegates looked at each other and said, this is the guy we should be nominating. 4 years later, they did. And as I mentioned, I was 12 when he ran in '80 and became president. And he had just an unbelievable influence on me, again, not only as a conservative and a Republican, but as an optimist. And throughout my life, I grew up in a small town, was born in Colorado Springs, where my dad was an assistant pastor, lived for about 7 years in Iowa in a small town of about 450 citizens. Ironically, at the time, a long time ago, back in the 70s, our state representative was a farmer just down the way from us in a different town by the name of Chuck Grassley, whose grandson is now the representative from that area and the Speaker of the General Assembly in Iowa. And of course, Chuck Grassley's a longtime elected U.S. Senator from Iowa now. And then when I was in third grade, my dad accepted the call to a church in Delavan, Wisconsin, a small little town near the border of Illinois. I grew up there, was active in Scouts and Eagle Scouts, sports, other activities, and had the honor of going to Boys State and Boys Nation, a program put on by the American Legion. And that's really where I took my interest in history from before and applied it to government and politics. I got a chance not only to go to our state program, but to Washington, where we had our U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., and really was drawn to public service at that point. Didn't go into it right away. Went to Marquette University, studied economics and political science, and ultimately worked for IBM for a while to pay for school. Then, of all places, for the American Red Cross when Elizabeth Dole was the president. But eventually there was an opening in the state legislature, and all my friends said, you know all about this stuff, you should run. And so that's exactly what I did at 25. I was one of the youngest ever elected to the Wisconsin General Assembly, and was honored to serve there. And ultimately that's where I was before I was elected county executive. So that's a little bit about who I am. On the larger sense, I'm married. My wife and I, Tonette, have been married since 1993. We've got two brilliant, wonderful sons who take after their mother, Matt and Alex, who are 26 and 25. And we split our time between Wisconsin, where home is, time in Virginia, where the headquarters of Young America's Foundation is. And as a Midwesterner in the winter, I spend as much time as I can out in Santa Barbara, California, where the Reagan Ranch is and the Reagan Ranch Center, which is owned and operated by Young America's Foundation.
That is an excellent story, an excellent journey. It has to be an honor to, be elected to lead such an excellent organization, a decades-old organization, and one of the most influential conservative organizations in the country. Obviously, you assumed leadership at a very divisive time in our political landscape, a very challenging time in our political landscape. So why do you think it is that you're the man for the moment?
Well, a combination of things. Certainly, personally being tested in Wisconsin, in a state that was highly divided all throughout my tenure, and even before that. Wisconsin, even in 2000 and 2004, was the closest blue state in America. So the margin between Bush and Gore and Bush and Kerry was very, very close. My elections, like almost all the other statewide elections since then, have been extremely close. So I'm used to that, but I'm also used to not just winning elections, but winning those big battles. And as I mentioned, I go back, a good chunk of who I am today is because of coming of age under Ronald Reagan. In fact, there was a whole bunch of us in that generation. To the east of me a few miles was a guy by the name of Wrights Previs. To the west of me was another guy named Paul Ryan. We each came of age in Wisconsin under Reagan. Sometimes people say, what was in the water? I said, well, it was Wisconsin. It wasn't the water, it was the beer. But seriously, at a time like this, Reagan came in when this country, very close election, 1980, going into the election, troubled times, oil embargoes, gas lines, high inflation, malaise, hostages for 444 days. We were down and out and beaten down, not just as Americans, but particularly conservatives. Not only did we feel the wrong person was nominated for Republicans in '76, we saw Jimmy Carter have the House, the Senate, good chunks of the state offices across this nation, and we really felt pretty down and out at that time. Ronald Reagan came in. His coattails helped us take the United States Senate. We saw major changes in the states, great reformers over the next few years like Tommy Thompson and John Engler and Terry Branstad came into office. And it was a total transformation. Those are the people who inspired me, starting out with Reagan, but also guys like Tommy Thompson. And so I know a thing or two, not only about reform, but about feeling down, about feeling depleted, and understanding ways you can get people back up. And it starts with really an aspirational goal, and that's what the long game we're pushing is all about, is saying we can't just be bogged down in the battles of the moment. We've got to have a long-term view, and preserving the heart and soul of this republic is really at the core of that.
And so for those who like to know their conservative street fighters a little bit better, a little bit more personally, favorite books?
I do. My book's called Unintimidated. I laughed years ago. One of the commentators we gave an advance copy to said, Scott, I read your book, and actually it's quite good. And I said, wait, is that a compliment? He said, hey, he goes, no. He goes, what I meant was most of the time politicians that write books, they're not even worth the paper they're printed on. This book, Unintimidated, which is probably at a bargain price now on Amazon or your local bookstore, but Unintimidated was really about what we went through back during those protests and leading up to the recall, and how we prevailed, not just I prevailed, but how our administration, my family personally, our lawmakers, and our state as a whole prevailed. And it goes back to a Reagan moment. I mentioned this in the book, but I remember there was one point where I got smart, and instead of waiting for the media to cover me, I would hold a press conference every day at 5 o'clock. I'd at least get on the local and statewide TV at least the first 5, maybe 10 minutes of the press conference. I'd get covered live, so I'd talk give a little update, take some questions, at least have a chance to talk directly to the people in my state. And over time, as the protests grew, there started to be network and cable news anchors and reporters there. And I remember one of the times, I think it was an NBC reporter, said to me, right at 5, the noise started to increase because the protesters knew I was going live. And this reporter said, Governor Walker, don't you think these protesters have a right to be heard? And I said, yeah, that's a great question. Actually, I do. That's what's great about America. You can speak out against your government and not have fear or retribution in terms of doing that, like you see around the world. I said, they have every right to be heard. But I said, at the same time, there are 1.5 million people in Wisconsin who voted for me in the last election who are not here in this Capitol. They're not protesting, but they're at home working, taking care of their families all around this great state. And I'm not going to let the voices of the rioters and protesters in the state capitol drown out the voices of the 1.5 million people who elected me to do exactly what I'm doing. That was just such a great reminder. And it's a lesson taken from Reagan about remember the people you serve, not just the people who are protesting, not just the people in the bubble in places like Washington, D.C., or even within the media bubble. Remember the people back home who elected you to do things you're supposed to do. And that's why in this case, that's part of what's given me, I think, purpose in this position, is remembering those students and particularly remembering how grateful I was to my parents and grandparents for passing on to me such a wonderful country and a wonderful state and a wonderful opportunity. I want to make sure these students have the same opportunities I did.
And so let's, on the topic of background, help people get to know you a little bit better in the low pressure settings, the non-political settings. Do you have any favorite books, movies, TV shows?
Oh, TV shows. My wife and I love watching American Idol. I know that sounds a little cheesy, but it's one of the few things that's still somewhat real. Yeah, sure, there's a little stage things along the way, but we get a joy out of watching, following those contestants, getting to know them. For a while, we liked Dancing with Stars, but that's kind of jumped the shark over the last few years. I think when reruns come on, we're a bit of junkies on things like Law and Order. Personally, for movies, I'm a total geek when it comes to Star Wars. I wasn't so happy about the second wave of the trilogy, which is technically episodes 1, 2, and 3. Loved the last trilogy part that came into play. Loved watching, although I'm a little annoyed with them politically about The Mandalorian. But I'm a total Star Wars geek. Love movies like Indiana Jones, others that came out of my generation. Total sucker for movies like The Shawshank Redemption when they come on anytime they're on a cable news or a rerun somewhere out there. And along with that, my big refuge, I'm not a golfer. I ride a Harley. I've got a 2003 Harley Davidson Road King. I love riding that all over Wisconsin, in many cases all over the country, and really enjoy that time. I love to hunt. Just got a nice 8-point buck this last season in Wisconsin. And my refuge when we were governor was we lived in the governor's residence, which was nice, not complaining, but the real refuge was there was a pier off of that house, and my wife and I bought a used pontoon boat, which we still have today on a lake in Wisconsin, and that's one of the great things. Even last year during the pandemic, there's no better way to social distance than to be out in a boat, floating around a beautiful lake with a summer shanty from Leinenkugels, watching a beautiful sunset in Wisconsin.
Hey guys, did you know we have a podcast called WJ Live?
The Western Journal's mission is to equip readers with the truth, and that's the same mission we have on WJ Live.
You'll hear from writers, editors, and special guests on the most important topics of the day.
You can watch us every day at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific on youtube.com/WJ Live.
While you're there, help us out by subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. See you there.